You're listening to Slutty Society, a podcast exploring sex, sexuality, and all things in between.
Hey, yo, man, you really don't have to be out here like this broadcasting all your fucking porno shit.
Hey loves, what's up? I'm your host, Sheila J, and I'm here to explore sex, sexuality, and all things in between. Thank you for being here to listen. So I knew I wanted to make this episode when I first started the podcast, but I wasn't sure when I would be ready to do so or when the right time would be. I guess there really isn't a right time, but in a way, I've been dreading doing this. However, I know in my heart that it's important to tell my story. I hope by sharing these experiences, I will in some way help someone or provide further perspective for people that may not have a full understanding of the impact of these situations. So this will not be one of my normal humorous episodes. I will be sharing with you a few significant experiences in my life that I've only shared with a few select individuals. In this episode, I will tell you my story as a victim, as a survivor of sexual assault and domestic violence. You know, there are a lot of people in my life or that have been in my life that don't know these things have happened to me. For a long period of time, I repressed some of these memories, which is pretty common for people who experience rape or abuse. Trauma victims often disassociate as a way of protecting themselves from disturbing memories. And there may be people in your own life that have experienced these situations, but because of shame, because of how society often treats victims, those people in your life might have kept this to themselves. I urge people to be mindful of how they speak out loud when they hear about sexual assault or domestic abuse in the media, or if you are a part of an opinionated conversation with others referencing these situations and are discussing what probably happened or what didn't happen, because you never know who around you has experienced a situation you may mock, a situation you may make fun of, a situation that you have not experienced but for some reason choose to make a one-sided assumption about. You know, people often like to say what they would do or what they wouldn't do in these circumstances. Oh, that wouldn't be me. I would have handled the situation like this or like that. But in reality, no one knows what they do until it happens to you. And even after that, after you've been sexually assaulted or after you've experienced abuse, it's confusing. It's complicated, and you have a long journey ahead to heal. And to be honest, a lot of people don't make it to the healing part. I've spoken about this in previous episodes, but I didn't really have a relationship with my mother. She was an alcoholic, and honestly, when she was alive, I carried a lot of hate for her because I was a kid and I couldn't understand why she chose drinking over being there for me. And I bring her up because after she died, I learned that she herself had experienced some similar situations to what I've experienced in her lifetime. I can't help but to wonder if those experiences fueled her alcoholism. In the present, I carry so much empathy for her, and I also feel a sense of sadness that we share similar experiences. So loves, this is going to be a tough episode for me. Again, these are things I have rarely shared. These experiences are very personal and have shaped a lot of my life in many ways. All right, there are a few parts to my story, all equally important, so I'll start from the beginning. When I first experienced sexual assault, rape to be specific, I was about the age of 14, maybe shy of 15 years old. I had stayed the night at a friend's house. She lived with her mom. She also had an older brother, but he lived with their dad and he was rarely over when I was there. So my friend's house had a finished basement and her bedroom was in the basement. My friend was asleep in the bedroom portion. I was asleep on the basement couch, which was outside of the bedroom. I'm not sure what time we went to sleep. I know it was pretty late. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to her older brother on top of me. He was under the covers, pulling my shirt up, pulling my shorts I had on down. It was a pretty terrifying way to wake up out of my sleep. I was in shock. Her brother never really talked to me the little times he had been around. I remember asking him to stop. He didn't. I tried to scream, but I couldn't get it out. The scream was trapped inside of me. I couldn't move. I cried as he raped me with my friend, with his little sister asleep in the room next to us. When he finished, all he could say was, "I'm so sorry," and he got up, left me, and I lie there paralyzed on the couch. I couldn't move, I couldn't fall back asleep, and I didn't know what to do. No one had ever talked to me about what to do if this happens. I think that's a conversation that doesn't happen often in our society, and it should. As much as rape and sexual assault happen, people tend to treat it like it's a one-off situation. In the US alone, 1 in 6 women have been a victim of attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. I think about 1 in 33 men have, if I'm remembering correctly, but after my friend's brother raped me, I went home the next morning and I tried to act like it didn't occur. Instead of telling my dad, I was more worried about his reaction. I think in that moment, I was more concerned about him losing his temper and him getting in trouble. My dad was very protective of me. I think that's very common when fathers have daughters. They are overprotective. There can be, in a way, a aggressive attitude towards the thought of their daughters dating or especially having sex. Because of that, I think a lot of fathers miss out on having real conversations with their daughters about certain situations because the daughter is in fear of the reaction and they're less likely to, confide in their fathers. So I never told my dad about my rape. I also had these feelings that it was my fault in some way. I ran through so many reasons in my head to blame myself for what he did to me. At the time, I was having severe body issues as a teenager. I'll share that when I went to the 6th grade, I was wearing a size C bra. I've always been very curvy, and in middle school especially, I was severely harassed. And inside, I hated my body because of that. I remember in middle school sitting next to this boy who tried to put his hands down my pants and up my shirt. I remember telling the teacher, and her response was that I should wear clothes that weren't form-fitting or a baggier shirt since I now had breasts. My 6th grade science teacher told me that this is how boys are at this age, and I'm essentially responsible for this boy not having self-control. So when I was raped by my friend's brother, I already had a lot of shame about my body, which only fueled me blaming myself. In society, we do young girls a disservice when their bodies start to develop and we push negativity onto them about that. We blame them for the attention they get. So I didn't tell my dad. He had also been battling cancer on and off for a few years at this point, and I felt like my rape would be a burden. I didn't want to distract him. I did, however, tell a boyfriend I had at the time what happened to me. He was upset, not necessarily at me, but I think I tried to take some of the blame for the assault when I confided in him. Again, I tried to make it my fault because I was really embarrassed that this had happened to me. I thought there was something wrong with me for this to have happened to me. As a teenage girl, knowing what to do at this time was, hard to navigate. So I buried that memory. I pushed it so far away that I tried to make myself forget. But a crazy thing about that kind of trauma it doesn't truly go away forever. It will resurface in other ways. It will find a way to come out some way, somehow. Now, about a year goes by after my friend's brother rapes me, and I was having a hard time emotionally because my dad had been diagnosed with cancer again. And I don't want to blame anyone. I don't want to blame any adults in my life at the time, but I was kind of forgotten about. Everyone was so focused on my dad's cancer. He meant a lot to a lot of people, and I kind of slipped through the cracks. To cope with the pain I was feeling from my dad being sick, to cope with the pain I was feeling from reoccurring thoughts of my rape, I was going to parties, underage drinking. I didn't do hard drugs, but I smoked a lot of marijuana. I wanted to numb myself. And at the age of 16, going on 17, I ended up getting pregnant. It's crazy to think that right now I have a son who will be 20 years old next fall. But I love him dearly. I wouldn't change him being here. It's just crazy to think about how young I was when I had him. Now, although I was partying, I always did really well in school. When I was pregnant with my son, I actually graduated a year early. I was given the option to finish high school with my peers or transfer schools, take additional classes, additional tests, and graduate early. So I obtained my high school diploma a year early, about 3 or so months pregnant. Unfortunately, a few months after graduating, my dad ended up passing from cancer. He never got the chance to meet my son, which was a bit unfortunate. And of course, things didn't work out with my son's father. We were kids, we were so young. I was in a lot of pain when my son was born, but I had to suck it up and be a mom. I promised my dad before he died that I would continue to accomplish things in life, that being a teen mom wouldn't stop me from making something of myself. So I moved out of state with my son to have a fresh start. I ended up getting a full-time job at a bank, enrolled myself in college, and soon I had my own apartment. I was very proud of myself, and I knew my dad would have been too. I've always hoped in some way he knows I made it or that he sees that I am doing well. But while I was a bank teller, there was this guy who was a regular customer who always talked to me. And at this time, I was about 18 years old. This guy dresses really nice. He's very charismatic. And one day he asked me out on a date. I believe we went to the Cheesecake Factory. We had a really good time. I eventually ended up dating him more. Time goes by and we end up in a full-blown relationship. Everything was really good. Eventually, I let him meet my son. We were really happy until we weren't. Maybe about 6 months into the relationship, his attitude towards me changed. He started being emotionally manipulative and controlling. He started to isolate me from my friends and family. He played a lot on the fact that I lost my dad, that I didn't have the closest relationship with family, and he always found a reason to not like my friends. I think people assume when you are in a abusive relationship that everything happens all at once, but the truth is it's a slow build-up. There's a lot of mental manipulation that occurs first that slowly strips your confidence, strips your self-worth. People who, are abusers are very good at this. So I experienced months of this behavior, and I'll never forget the first time it got physical. We were out to eat at a restaurant, and he said he didn't like the way I smiled at the waiter. He cussed the waiter out. We left, got in the car. Now we're at a stoplight. He put the car in park, came over to the passenger side, and pulled me out of the car by my hair. He then pushed me to the ground, got back in the car, and he left me there. I actually had to call a friend to pick me up. The next day, he was very apologetic, and I was young. I was 18, legally an adult, but there was still so much to life that I didn't know back then that I know now. So I took him back believing he would never do that again. And he didn't. until a few months later. This time, he didn't like an outfit that I had on. He went into my closet, took out a bunch of my clothes, threw them over my apartment balcony, broke a bunch of my accessories, my jewelry, and then he held me down and cut the dress I was wearing off of me. He then proceeded to drag me around my apartment by my hair, to the point the next day my back was covered in rug burns. Dragging me by my hair was something he eventually ended up doing pretty often. It was fucked up. I remember going to a family member about it, and the first thing they asked me is, well, what did you do? You must have done something for him to do that. Why would he just do that? He doesn't seem like the type of person to do that, which was a pretty horrible response. I think in society there's this perspective that an abuser or even someone who has sexually assaulted people are 100% monsters. And what I mean by this is that there's a perspective in society that these people have to appear to be quote unquote bad people or criminals, or they have to be pariahs or outcasts of society, that they have to be some scary person. In reality, people who abuse, people who sexually assault others are everyday people. They can be parents to someone, siblings to someone, uncles, aunts, cousins. They can be individuals with great careers, individuals who are family-oriented, individuals that are even well-respected in their community. This boyfriend I had at the time had a great relationship with his parents. He had a sister he adored. He was financially stable. He was well put together. If you met him, you would have never known he had this darkness to him. And he mentally broke me down. I had completely lost myself. I had no self-esteem. He started making statements that he would hate to see something happen to me or something bad happen to me if I left him. I was living in fear, and the abuse only got worse. I remember there was an incident where we were in a car and he alleged he saw me earlier that day when I was at work. But he said he saw me driving somewhere with a guy in my car. Now, this wasn't true, but he always made stuff like that up, and I think he did that to have an excuse to put his hands on me. But while we were in the car, he yelled, started beating on the steering wheel while he was driving, started swerving through traffic. Mind you, we were on the expressway when he was doing this. He was acting like he was going to hit other cars, and he told me he would kill us both. Deep down, I knew, this wasn't right. This wasn't normal, but I didn't know how to safely leave him. I felt like I couldn't go to my family for help, and I learned I couldn't go to the police. During one beating, my next door neighbor at the time, this guy who was in his late 20s, called the police. My neighbor was knocking on my door while he was calling the police, and my boyfriend heard him, stopped beating me up, started punching himself, and then started breaking stuff in my apartment. I was confused at first, but then I realized he was trying to make it appear that we were fighting each other. It was a crazy thing to witness. And that's exactly what he told the police, that we had been fighting each other. I told them it wasn't true. I actually begged one of the officers to help me, and they said if they had to come back, we both would go to jail. That wasn't the first time my boyfriend lied about abusing me. I remember his mom saw a bruise on my arm and asked me about it. I naively thought she would believe me, but he told her I did it to myself, and she believed him. She didn't want to believe her son was that kind of person, until one day he beat me up so bad I couldn't go to work. I had, 2 black eyes, a busted lip, rug burns all over my back from him dragging me across the carpet. I had called her for help, and she called him, and I remember hearing her say, "Is the pussy that good that it makes you lose your mind and go crazy?" That kind of statement puts blame on me, that sex with me is so good that it made him crazy, which is, by the way, a comment someone else made years later when I told them about this experience. that sometimes pussy is so good that it makes men go crazy. That statement removes the accountability from the abuser. In society, we don't like to believe that there are a lot of people walking around that are existing who need help, who have untreated mental health issues. And those issues have nothing to do with the people they abuse, definitely nothing to do with sex. I think statements like that are so harmful. Now, I'll also share with you that in this relationship, there were a couple of times where he choked me to the point I passed out. I once woke up to him holding a pillow over my face and laughing. There was an incident where he held me down and burned me with an iron. Another one where he chucked a set of keys and hit me in the eye with them, which I had to actually go to the ER for, and so on. He would sometimes follow me when I wasn't with him. He would pop up at places. He would stalk me. So all of this time he had, been abusing me. He never hit me in front of my son until one day he did. That was the night I left him. On this night, I was holding my son. I heard footsteps coming towards me from behind. So, I turn around, and as soon as I turn around, he punched me in my mouth. He punched me in my mouth while I'm holding my son, who was about 2 years old at the time. Something inside me clicked and told me I had to get out of there, and if I didn't, I would die. Something just took over me. I put my son's shoes on, I grabbed my purse, my keys, which were nearby, and I ran towards the door. Now, he saw me trying to leave, and he grabbed the monitor of my computer and threw it at me as I ran out the door. I didn't even have time to put my shoes on. Didn't give a shit about anything inside of my apartment. I just ran as fast as I could, holding my toddler. I made it to my car, strapped my son in the car seat, got in, locked the doors, and there was my boyfriend standing next to the car. He followed me into the parking lot. He began beating on my window as I started the car. As I'm driving away, he goes and gets in his car and starts following me. He attempted to knock me off the road a couple of times with my 2-year-old son in the car. Eventually, out of nowhere, he stopped and he just turned around in the middle of the street and went the other direction. To this day, I will never know what came over him to do that, but I tell you, I feel so blessed. I feel so thankful because a lot of people in the situation I was in did not get that chance. They did not make it out of the situation. Now, I didn't go to the cops because they hadn't been helpful before. I didn't think an order of protection or a restraining order would do anything but make him angry. Those pieces of paper don't have the best history of actually helping victims of domestic violence. There's a lot of data on that. You can look it up, but with the help of a family member, I packed up my apartment within days and moved to Indiana, where my stepmom was living at the time. I had to quit my job. I had to leave school. I felt like a complete failure, and I took on that shame from being abused. So I started my life over again. I changed my phone number. I found another job. I enrolled in a different school. Even though I was states away from my now ex-boyfriend, I kept tabs on him via social media, which went on for years because I continued to live in fear of him. After the abuse, I didn't realize it at the time, but later in life, I found out I had been suffering from PTSD. In society, we often hear about PTSD when we talk about veterans or people that are in the military. But there isn't a lot of conversation about PTSD and trauma victims of abuse or sexual assault. I also, developed severe insomnia, and the little times I did sleep, I had nightmares. I was anxious all the time. I felt very on edge, and certain things would trigger flashbacks. I couldn't be intimate with anyone for probably a year or more after that relationship. But I tried really hard to forget once again about what happened to me. I buried all of that pain and went on with my life. by this point, with my rape, with the abusive relationship, never really having a chance to grieve my dad properly, being a mom so young, those kinds of things affected my ability to build relationships. And I don't just mean romantic ones, that's definitely a part of it, but for a long period of time in my life, after so much happening to me so close together, I felt very emotionally disconnected. Even so, I tried very hard to fit in to appear normal on the outside, and I was able to accomplish that for a really long time. But one more incident I would experience in my lifetime would cause all of those things I never processed fully, that I never healed from, to resurface. Whew. Okay, so a lot of time goes by. I've made a life for myself on the West Coast, doing well in my career. I ended up in a relationship that didn't work out, and I was pretty down about it. A friend of mine suggested we go out. She says, let's go to dinner, let's go out afterwards. She just really wanted to cheer me up. So I got a brand new outfit, new shoes, tried to get myself in the mood to go out. After dinner, we go to a club. Now, I hadn't been a fan of nightclubs for some time before this, just getting older and not liking that environment, but I went anyways. My friend really wanted to do something nice for me. She really wanted me to have a good time. So we are in this club. It's very packed. I was a little irritated and my feet hurt really bad because of these brand new heels I had on. Eventually, from across the club, we see this guy who's dressed up and he does a hand gesture for us to come over. He had to be in his early 40s, I'm guessing, and when we get to him, he said, you guys look like you could use somewhere to sit. You can sit at this VIP table with me. He told us he was the manager there and all of the staff were, speaking to him, coming up to him, asking questions and this and that. And, my feet were killing me. So I'm like, why not? Like, let's sit here. Let's sit down. He had a bottle at the table of some dark liquor, which I don't normally drink. So I asked for another drink, and there's a separate bar behind the VIP that's only for the VIP tables. And I thought I did a good job watching my drink come from there. My friend gets a drink as well. So we talk to this guy. One of the security people come over. He introduces the security guy to us. They're super chill. We're all talking. At some point, I started to feel weird and disoriented, like I may faint. I excused myself to the restroom. Now, for a couple of years before this incident, I was having all of these weird symptoms. Later, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, but at this point, I had no diagnosis, and I had been seeing all of these different specialists. So on this night, I thought I was having another one of the weird symptoms. I remember going to the restroom, and then everything went black. So the next thing I remember, I wake up, it's the next day. I'm in a unfamiliar bedroom. I'm completely naked with no clothes on, and I can tell someone has had sex with me. For several years, I hadn't been with any men, just women, so it was clear that a man had had sex with me, and it appeared to be a very rough sex because I was in a lot of pain. I was scared, my brain felt foggy, and I could not remember anything no matter how hard I tried. I also felt this feeling similar to being hungover, but I knew I wasn't hungover because I hadn't drank a lot. The fogginess also was oddly familiar, which I'll get to here in a bit, but I started looking for my clothes and they were nowhere in this room. I'm terrified to open the door since I didn't know where I was. My phone and my purse were also missing. A few minutes later, this guy comes in the room. It's the manager of the club. He's smiling and talking about how much fun we had last night and It was so bizarre because I have no memory of the so-called fun he was talking about. I asked him for my clothes, for my phone, for my purse. He's just smiling. He goes to another room and retrieves all of my stuff, hands it to me, tries to kiss me. I kind of move out of the way. I go into a bathroom that was attached to the bedroom I was in to put my clothes on. I noticed that the brand new skirt I had bought the day prior was ripped on the side, and my brand new shoes were all scuffed as if someone had dragged me. I turned my phone on and I had a bunch of missed calls from the friend I was with. I exited the bathroom and told him I needed to go. He offered to give me a ride home, but I insisted that I would get myself an Uber. As he's walking me out of his house, a young woman, probably about 19, 20, comes out of another room. He introduces me to her as his niece, that she's staying with him, which I found really creepy because he just had sex with me while I was unconscious with his niece in his home. That still makes my stomach turn to this day. But I leave, go outside to get an Uber, and I realize I'm in a completely different state when I open the Uber app. Now, Portland is across the bridge from Vancouver, Washington, and I was a little bit further than that. I was actually past Vancouver. Again, I had no memory of anything after going to the bathroom at that nightclub, but I was probably about an hour away from where I lived. I paid for my expensive Uber ride, get home, and I called my friend. She tells me that she was worried about me, that I went to the bathroom, I never came back, and she started feeling strange herself, so she tried to get to her car, which she did. And once she was in her car, she called me, but the manager from the club answered my phone, and he told her I was with him and that I would call her later. Then she ended up passing out in her car. So we both were drugged. That foggy feeling I mentioned before, the one I said felt oddly familiar, it was familiar to me because in my early 20s, me and someone else I was with were drugged by some guys that bought us some drinks. And thankfully, in that incident, we made it home. I actually passed out in the snow, but we both felt weird. The next day, I went to the doctor and actually found out I had traces of the date rape drug in my system. So when this memory from my early 20s came back, I knew I had been drugged again. The manager of the club, the security guard, whoever was working behind the bar, I think they were all in on it. And I don't know what's worse, being raped by my friend's brother or being raped by a stranger and having no memory of what happened to me. I think both are as equally as bad. After all of the trauma I experienced in my life, I tried to do, what I always did. I tried to forget and bury it, but it was harder this time. The amount of embarrassment I felt about this happening to me again, the amount of shame I felt took over me. I couldn't concentrate. I could barely function. I remember about a week went by. I was at work and I started having a breakdown. I called one of my really good friends. I told him about what happened to me, and he told me to go to the police, that I had to report this. So I go home, I grab the clothes I had worn to the club that night. I had put them in a plastic bag, tied it, and hid it in my closet. Maybe subconsciously, I knew I would go report it at some point, but I'm not sure why I did that, but I was glad, I had those clothes in that moment. So I go to the police station with the clothes to report what had happened. And instead of hearing me out, the police questioned me over and over about how much I had to drink. They asked if I was sure that my story was really what happened a crazy amount of times, and it didn't really appear they were interested in believing me. It didn't seem like they cared. And I didn't want to continue to have the conversation, so I left. I left feeling even worse than I did before I went. All of the pain I had felt from all of these incidents started to consume me. I was overwhelmed. I became depressed. I think the health issues I had impacted my depression, not knowing what was going on with my body. But months and months went by and I had so many dark thoughts. I was in a horrible place, and inside I was battling all of these dark thoughts on a daily basis. I kind of put distance between myself and everyone else. And I remember at the time I was working downtown and I would, go to the rooftop of our building and look down at the traffic and think about how it would feel to jump. I didn't want to be alive anymore. I hated myself for all of the things that had happened to me, even though, I know now that none of those things were my fault. But for a long period of time, I woke up every day thinking about dying. Time went by, and then the pandemic happened. I know being in quarantine affected everyone differently, but for me, it made me realize I had to get help. I needed some major therapy to work out all of the years of trauma that I had experienced. I could no longer hold everything in. I needed to work through it. I needed to process it all. I truly believe that, the love I have for my son, the love that I have for my daughter played the biggest role in my quest to deal with these traumatic events. I realized I could not leave them in the same way my mother left me. I will say, therapy is an ongoing process. You can't just go a couple of times and expect to be healed. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of dedication. I still go to therapy until this day, and I've learned so much about myself. I've learned how to process and not hold things in. I've learned healthy ways to deal with triggers and how to, also be more present in life. And nothing is perfect. I still have bad days like anyone else, but I learned to get to a place where I can live my life without letting these traumas consume me, without letting that shame consume me. That shame isn't mine to carry, and I'll stand by those words for anyone who has experienced any kind of abuse or sexual assault. It is not your fault, and regardless of what has happened to you, it doesn't make you less than, it doesn't define who you are. Now, something I consider a blessing out of all of this is that with my own daughter, I started having conversations with her surrounding these situations pretty early on, conversations I never had with my parents, and I've shared with her what I've gone through, what I've learned. I've allowed her to ask me questions. I think because of this, that she'll be more comfortable coming to me no matter what. I think we will always be able to have open conversations, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. I'm happy we have that. It makes a difference. I think I'll be able to provide her with, so many tools for her life that I never received. All right. I know this episode was deep, it was heavy, and it may have been hard for some people to listen to, but again, telling my story was very important to me, and I truly hope someone out there was able to take something from this. I hope I helped in some way. Thank you for listening. Until next time, bye, loves.